There's an archaic thought process that much of the Hollywood press adheres to and judges new releases by, and that is runtime. Audiences simply won't sit through a movie more than 2 hours long, darling. Back in the early 2000s, the Lord of the Rings extended cuts started to put that notion to bed, with the Hobbit movies thereafter doing much the same thing. We have since seen director's cuts that add back in cut content to fill in plot holes or expand on an idea, and while not changing the story in any way, they do better the overall experience. Then came Avengers End Game. That showed that audiences would happily sit through 3 or more hours of content in a cinema as long as it was enjoyable and not just long for the sake of being long. Rarely, though, have we seen a movie that releases an extended cut, years after the release of the theatrical cut, that changes the character's story and tone of nearly everything. If the Snyder Cut had released in 2017 with its 4 hours 2 minutes runtime, 3:53 if you don't watch the credits, and its gothic, grimdark atmosphere, it would have been laughed out of cinemas before launch for being a superhero movie that dares to run so long and not adhere to the Marvel formula. Thankfully, in 2021, the world is a vastly different place, and nearly 4 hours of distraction may just keep us sane in yet another day of lockdown quarantine. Not a great advert for the colonization of Mars, these lockdowns, eh? Anyhow, welcome everybody, my name is Doragon, and this is my review of Zack Snyder's Josstice League. In late 2020, Snyder and Warner Brothers announced that the Snyder Cut would be releasing in 2021, and it would be the definitive vision that Zack had had for this movie from the word go. I watched different pockets of fans explode in different ways, and listened to the arguments from either side, including an incredibly impassioned positive response from my great friend Wibblesniff. My personal reality was, I didn't care. I had enjoyed the theatrical cut of Josstice League. It wasn't cinema greatness or Oscar-worthy, but it is what my family and I call enjoyable rubbish. Akin to the likes of Baywatch or A Knight's Tale. And I felt that there wasn't really a need for a fully reworked movie. As such, I found myself trying to temper my friend's expectations. His excitement was inclusive and infectious, but Warner Brothers had just put themselves in a position that showed that they didn't care about inclusivity, due process, abusers or fans. And as such, I didn't want him to be disappointed. This attempted tempering of his excitement started to actually infect my thoughts about the movie. And just before its launch, I expected a sum total of nothing from the Snyder Cut. Now, I don't hate Zack Snyder or his style. In fact, I think his original 2 DC movies are 2 of the best superhero films put on screen. Man of Steel was a look at Superman that humanized the alien somewhat, and gave both him and his adoptive parents realistic human arcs and faults. Jonathan Kent was one of the more real big-screen fathers we've ever seen, even going as far as to tell his son to not save people, to prevent him from being cast as an outsider and persecuted. Something that I'm sure that any parent out there can relate to. Batman vs Superman for me was the perfect translation of the Dark Knight Returns graphic novel and animated movie into the DC universe that Snyder had created. It honoured the characters that had begun their arc in Man of Steel, and didn't need to beat us around the head with Batman's lore for the umpteenth time in cinema. People complain about the "Save Martha" line, but if I was in a battle and someone told me to save my mother's name, it would stop me in my tracks. I imagine that feeling could only be accentuated within a man who has never come to terms with the tragedy of losing his mother, and Supes is smart enough to exploit that if needs be. Take in the extended cut, and it fixes many people's complaints with the theatrical release, and feels so much more cohesive when viewed. So realistically, I should have been hyped for the Snyder Cut. Reality though? I was worried that it would disappoint me and so many others, as so many movies, TV shows, games and books had done recently, when ego had got the better of the creators. And make no mistake, Snyder and the cast were definitely showing that same level of before a fall ego here. Over the course of its launch weekend, I made it a mission to actually watch the movie. Now, I'm no cinema critic, I've worked on movie and TV sets, so I know some of their inner workings. But as a viewer, I don't pick apart every scene. I don't judge how a curtain may represent the mood of a piece, nor how a character may be held up as a messiah in direct relation to our real-world beliefs and such. These thoughts in this review are coming from a purely average viewer's perspective. Now, there will be spoilers for both the 2017 theatrical cut and the Snyder cut within this review. So add this to your watch later list and come back after viewing the movie if spoilers matter to you. Otherwise, without further ado, let's get into the review. In its first hour, the Snyder cut delivers more than my expectations of nothing. However, what it delivers in this first hour is not always a positive thing. I want to begin with pacing, because it's a matter that film and TV makers, along with authors and video game developers, have been getting very easily wrong in recent years, where they blast past the interesting and important stuff and spend way too long focusing on the insignificant. This movie cannot be accused of blasting past anything, which is a positive. Every aspect put on screen is given the full attention that Snyder thinks it deserves, whether that be 30 seconds or a few hours. What this first hour does, however, with its pacing, is drag everything into a gratuitous slow-motion shot that either overstays its welcome, loses all meaning, or makes the situation just that little bit creepy. The first 2 minutes of the film are literally from the last movie. It's a replay of Superman's death in ultra slow motion. But this time, the scene continues on afterwards, showing his death cry as spreading out like a tsunami from the epicenter in Gotham. And it starts to travel the world to hidden locations, no matter the magic hiding them or the depths that they are at. The death scream traveling the world is great. It is this moment that awakens the mother boxes, the MacGuffin in both the 2017 theatrical release and the Snyder cut, and it causes them to call the big bad to earth as it is no longer protected. I love this moment. I love the setup, and I love how it is all relayed without a single word being uttered. My problem with this scene is that it is 6.5 minutes long. The first 10 minutes of a movie are your hook. If you don't grasp your audience in those 10 minutes, then it is highly likely that 80 to 90% of them will stop watching at that point. So to take up more than half of your hook with a slow motion scream traveling the globe is risky, and honestly doesn't land well in my opinion. In fact, for me, it had quite the opposite effect, and it started to push me away from the movie. When you consider the good moments in the 6.5 minute stretch, there is no way it should drive you away from wanting to watch this feature. Superman's ship foretells Steppenwolf's arrival, and only Lex Luthor is privy to this. We see Cyborg holed up at home with a mother box in his cupboard. We see Atlantis and Mera protecting their box. And we finish with the Amazons in Themyscira, whose box cracks its seal upon awakening and starts the plot in earnest. It is a beautifully filmed piece, but I feel that it would have landed much better if it were just shown at a normal speed, almost halving its runtime. As it is, it's an opening sequence that can very easily drive viewers away before the title has done anything of note. Now, there are other concerns that I have in this opening scene, and we'll start with an obvious one. Amber Heard. Amber Heard is an abusive person, not just towards her ex-spouse. There are also accounts and evidence of this taking place towards cast and crew on sets as well. And while I could understand not removing the scenes that she was already in, or ones that had already been filmed, she was brought back in for reshoots, and Zack openly sang her praises thereafter. When a big part of getting Snyder's vision of the Justice League movie to see the light of day was built on the claims that it wouldn't be hampered by Joss Whedon being abusive to the cast and crew, and the Warner Brother executives being racist enough to have vast swathes of Cyborg cut from the movie wouldn't be involved, to then have him singing the praise of another abusive entity just makes him seem completely disingenuous and undermines all of the healing processes of the cast and crew who have suffered at the hands of others. Then, there is the armor of the Amazons. Now, I use that term loosely because they don't have any. This is an issue that was raised before the release of the 2017 theatrical cut. That the armour of the Amazons was a pure male fantasy, designed specifically to show off as much of the female form and skin as possible. This is a direct contradiction to the Wonder Woman movie's portrayal of the Amazons, and for me it was difficult to actually watch. These costumes are so bad that it felt like I was watching the start of an incredibly low-budget porn parody of Josstice League. It's awkward and demeaning. There is so much more time spent with the Amazons in this movie, and entirely new scenes that are 100% CGI. It would not have taken that much extra effort, therefore, to correct this sexist issue and portray the Amazons in a more equal and tasteful light. The armour could still be fitted. Oddly enough, fitted armour tends to actually work better anyway. But it could also actually be functional and modest, something that the Snyder Cut completely misses the mark on. Bad pacing, an abuser front and centre, and demeaning costumes all crop up within the first 7 minutes of this feature. To put it mildly then, pretty damn poor start to a movie, and I would not blame anyone for finishing their viewership of the film at this point. After this, however, the movie really starts to sell itself well, and I have mostly positive things to say about it. Before talking about the positives, however, there are two more glaring complaints that I have with the Snyder Cut and I want to touch on. They are Barry Allen's Creepfest and the Wonder Woman in London bit. Now bear with me on that latter one. It's probably not what you think. Each character gets a vastly improved introduction or reintroduction in this movie. Wonder Woman's is far superior, showing off her amazing abilities while also showing that she has grown dramatically since her solo outing, circa 100 years earlier. She is both harder and softer in everything that she does, from battling bad guys to caring for children who have just been held at gunpoint. There are two negatives with her reintroduction though. One is her destruction of the terrorists. Now this, she would do, no questions. And it would be brutal. She's a warrior after all, taught to kill enemies from an early age, and she's also enraged at his actions. She would not, however, cause enough destruction to endanger the lives of innocent bystanders and police officers on the street below, regardless of how angry she is. This woman is over 5,000 years old. Her tactical mind and ability far surpasses anyone or anything else on the planet. There is no way that someone of that experience and caliber would go off the handle in such a manner and risk collateral human damage. It's a moment so out of character that it jarred me away from the screen, questioning what had just happened. A different and smarter resolution to that scene would have fitted much better. My biggest gripe with Wonder Woman's reintroduction, though, is that yet another American production throws Brits into their movie and doesn't have the slightest clue about what we actually do. So gives us American stereotypes with a funny accent instead. Police on the street with sniper rifles? Nah. Pedestrians around the police? Nope. Standard officers on the front line in a terrorist attack and hostage situation? Unlikely. This isn't how we do things over here. There are highly trained sectors of the police force that handle these situations, and they don't do it in fluoro vests. There would be negotiators, sharpshooters that hide themselves away, infiltration teams and terror response units. The depiction in this movie is so very un-British, and it's a gripe that will only resonate with British people. But please, Hollywood, can someone do us real justice at some point? Told you it probably wasn't what you thought. The Barry Allen Creepfest that I mentioned is in his introduction, where he saves a lady from certain death thanks to a car crash. I realise this is most likely Iris West or Patty Spivot, but her name's never mentioned, so we'll just leave her as the woman. This act is fine. Even the slow motion love at first sight stereotype is fine. The placing of the woman into a proper position to allow her to be saved and not scramble her insides is fine. Even though it's a scene of everything wrong with comic books, On the outside, there is nothing inherently wrong with the way this particular scene plays out, but it gives off a very uncomfortable and creepy air when watching it. Wibblesniff asked me what I made of Barry's Gropefest when we discussed the movie. My partner was watching the scene wide-eyed and disturbed. Nearly everyone I have spoken to about this scene feels very uneasy with it. The slow-motion pickup of the hot dog feels overtly sexual and doesn't feel like it's there as a ploy to help him get the job in the pet store. Though that payoff of feeding the dogs in a stressful situation was a nice touch on an otherwise very weird scene in general. I think I get what Snyder and the team were aiming for here, but something went horribly wrong, and this scene makes Barry come off as some form of sex pest for the most part. This sounds like a lot of problems with the movie. And were it a theatrical length feature film, it would be. Even here, in a 4-hour epic, they can massively detract from the experience. But every film has things, moments and aspects that not everyone will like. Make no mistake, the heinous issues here, like keeping an abuser on the payroll and objectifying women, these are a problem to everyone, and these cannot be overcome. Zack, Deborah, and everyone else involved in those decisions need to be ashamed and hold themselves to a better standard moving forward. I am, however, glad to say that any other qualm I have with this title is a minor in-the-moment gripe, and it doesn't detract from the overall movie. So let's start looking at the rest of the movie. As I've said, I didn't expect anything from this film, and I enjoyed the 2017 release despite its faults. But after those first 7 minutes, and for now, overlooking the issues that I've highlighted, this movie is a marked improvement in most aspects. Every single character is given an appropriate amount of time in the sun, with additional time being given to characters who need an initial introduction. Because of the long runtime, each character feels like they have an appropriate origin story without the need for additional viewership outside of this movie. This makes this particular film feel much more complete than any of the Marvel team-up ventures, and as such, feels more satisfactory to watch. Cyborg is a completely different character here, and his importance, even now, is so undersold. His abilities are actually properly highlighted. He has a full and beautiful arc, becoming the heart, soul, and glue of the Josstice League. Ray Fisher's portrayal of the character is exceptional, and his performance is so varied. He shows everything from anger and betrayal towards his in-movie father, through to internal disgust at the monster he has become. He flexes his range by showing a begrudging acceptance of his new skills by helping disadvantaged families and minorities, through to acceptance of himself by joining the League, grief at his father's sacrifice, and strength in stepping up to the plate in the final confrontation, despite the proximity to his grief. In the final moments of the movie, he shows joy. Joy at being accepted by these other weirdos, joy at having a family despite his bloodkin being gone. The writing, direction, and acting of Cyborg's character is beautiful. I have no other words to describe it. I need no other words to describe it. For a character that is mostly machine, it is one of the most versatile and human performances I have seen in any medium for quite a while, and this character alone is worth watching the Snyder Cut for. It is a change so drastic, so positive, and so representational for so many minorities. It's a simple thing, giving a real performance of a well-rounded character, but so often in movies, the black person is there to fill a diversity quota. And this level of thought that is second nature for many other characters is often not given to them. Representation matters. And though this movie does fail in other areas, it should be held up as a beacon to the rest of Hollywood on how to do black characters right. Flash is much better too. Gone are the ridiculous rambling jokes. Instead, an enthusiastic and excited young character who is rubbing shoulders with his heroes, steps into the frame while being exceptionally driven to better his and his father's lot in life. He is still the comic relief in the moments that need it, but it has a more realistic feeling and isn't forced as it so often felt in the 2017 cut. Unfortunately, that introduction scene gives an undercurrent of creepiness to the Flash's actions for much of the movie, and is a hard feeling to shift. If only that scene had remained cut. If you can remove yourself from that, Ezra Miller puts in a stellar performance, again with a vast variety and range, going from the serious to the comical, something that I know from my own experience is actually quite hard to do. He delivers lines that should feel cheesy in a somehow believable manner, and were it not for the character of the Flash, this movie would take a much darker turn in its resolution. My only drawback for the character is the way that he runs. If you've ever seen that episode of Friends when Phoebe and Rachel go running in the park, take that image of Phoebe running with limbs flying everywhere, accentuate that, and then add speeds faster than light atop of it. It looks ridiculous every single time his powers are showcased, and would likely not produce the results that are shown on screen. This is one time that I would personally say that Marvel has done the thing better. Their depiction of a speedster like Quicksilver, with the running action, the slowing of time, the depiction of his powers on screen for us mere mortals, is far superior to what is offered with the Flash. We are of course talking the Fox Studios Quicksilver here. This doesn't really detract from Flash. I think it may just be a me thing. I just wish it were displayed more Sprinter-esque. He is, however, yet again, a well-rounded character and integral to the plot. This is a special movie in that regard. The other characters that we've come to know more through their own solo movies, such as Bats, Supes, Wonder Woman and Aquaman, are all integral as well. As is Alfred. As is Jim Gordon. As is Lois Lane, Martian Manhunter, Silas Stone and Martha Kent. This is a large ensemble cast, and it would be so easy to just write a central protagonist with a strong supporting lineup. But instead, we are greeted with a cast that no matter their screen time, all feel completely important. And you feel as if the movie would collapse completely with just one of them removed. That's rare. That's hard to write. Heck, I'm finding it hard to write a review that displays how important every single character is. And yet the Snyder Cut pulls it off. From Hippolyta to Desaad to Steppenwolf, Mera and Darkseid, every single character feels vitally important to the plot and movie as a whole. That is amazing characterization. That is stunning writing, brilliant direction, and most importantly, heartfelt editing to bring the vision to life. Because of these characters, the plot could remain fairly thin. Heck, the movie starts with Batfleck pulling a team together because there might be danger. He's unaware of the invasion of Steppenwolf and Darkseid's parademon forces, because it starts in Themyscira, outside of the Bat's paranoid vision. But there are so many strong narrative threads that all get utilised and pulled together to make this whole experience so cohesive. It's a strong narrative that builds towards a positive crescendo. Much of the overarching plot is the same as the 2017 version, but everything is given room to grow and blossom here. From Steppenwolf's motivations as an outcast of Darkseid's forces, through to Lois and Martha's grief, the Mother Box's science through to the reasoning behind bringing Supes back. Everything feels fleshed out. It has an appropriate focus, and it drives the narrative forward, something that many of the longer movies of recent years haven't understood or achieved. Due to this, the 4 hours do not feel like 4 hours. Whereas with the likes of The Irishman, a movie that is actually shorter in length, it felt like an eternity before I eventually gave up just over halfway through. That is the importance of a narrative drive. That is what keeps a story moving forward and makes time feel inconsequential when done well. And Zack Snyder's Josstice League does this well. It may well be standard comic book affair of an external threat has come to Earth. But as I said in my Assassin's Creed Valhalla review, some of the best stories in human history are based on the simple premise of survival. And here we are, with another good, solid and enjoyable story based on that simple fact. The narrative is good. The momentum is positive. And it leads to a very enjoyable time overall. Much of the campaign to release the Snyder Cut was around filling in plot holes or correcting wrongs done to characters. One of the biggest complaints levelled at the 2017 theatrical release was that the moment Supes returned, all threat of Steppenwolf was nullified. There was suddenly no stakes, no danger, and everyone would be fine simply because of one man. While I appreciated that in 2017, as actually showing off some of Superman's astronomical power levels, as a viewing experience, I understand that the removal of threat before the third act sucks and undermines all resolution thereafter. Somehow, in the Snyder Cut, Supes returning feels different. It doesn't feel definitive, as if all threat has ended. If anything, it initially heightens the threat, with Supes battling his friends and eventually disappearing with Lois. Lois has autonomy in this release, approaching the returned and confused Supes of her own volition and not summoned at the request of the Bat as an insurance policy. It adds depth to the interaction, gives the viewer hope of a proper Superman return, but is by no means definitive. It is not until Clark reunites with his mother as well, at the old farm back in Kansas, that we start to feel relief that he has returned. But this is somewhat offset by him then wearing the black suit. The black Superman costume is a regeneration suit. It was made for Supes by the Fortress of Solitude to help him regenerate his health and his powers. It is worn when he is not at full strength to try and bolster his abilities. Unfortunately, this is very poorly explained in the Snyder Cut, and is knowledge that only comic fans would have. For me, it meant that there was still a tangible threat in Steppenwolf, and especially in Desaad and Darkseid. But for many an average viewer, this black suit is simply an aesthetic change and holds no bearing to the overall plot, meaning for them, the threat is still nullified by Superman's return. This is actually why I really like the Snyder Cut. It knows what it is. It knows the story it wants to tell, and it doesn't hold your hand through every single story beat, assuming a level of intelligence from the viewer. After more than a decade of superhero movies being the pinnacle earners at the box office, and using a paint-by-numbers formula to ensure success, to get not just one, but 3 installments that subvert that paint-by-numbers formula is refreshing and needed to keep the genre fresh. Without pandering to those who belittle anything that isn't fully explained in a movie, the Snyder Cut tells a more complete story than I feel we have seen in the genre to date, barring maybe Into the Spider-Verse. It is not a perfect movie. There are issues with equality, which we've highlighted, and some problems with pacing and characterization in the odd moment. But as a whole, Zack Snyder's Justice League is a testament to a writer and director with a vision that he was unwilling to compromise on. And the end result is an epic that hits more than enough of the right notes for me to recommend this movie to all superhero fans and say that it is the best live-action superhero movie we've yet seen. And now, for the unscripted bit. I would like to thank you all very much for tuning into this. I was very dubious about the Snyder Cut. If you go and talk to Wibblesniff on any of his streams at any point, I will link it down below. He will tell you how much I was bad-mouthing the Snyder Cut before release. Not through, oh, I think it's going to be terrible. I just didn't think it was going to live up to the hype that everybody had. I do think that put me in a much better position to actually enjoy the movie, because there are people who haven't done so, who maybe bought into the hype. But I loved it. It's not the best movie out there. There are some big problems, as we've highlighted. There are a couple of other ones as well, like the CGI not being the absolute best. It's not going to age well at all, a lot of the CGI here. Some of that's going to be time constraints, some of it's going to be monetary constraints, because this was all put together tail end of 2020 sort of thing. There was very little time to put all of this in place. And there's some green screen moments which I'm pretty sure were done better back in Xena Warrior Princess than they were in the Amazon's Themyscira section. But overall, it's fun. It is a good movie, and it doesn't feel like it's 4 hours long. I hope that this is a bit of a wake-up call to studios around the world. Audiences will sit through longer movies, as long as those movies are enjoyable. The Snyder Cut did not feel like a 4-hour movie. Avengers End Game did not feel like a 3-hour, 20-minute movie. Yet things like The Irishman have felt much longer than they are. It's the only one that I can think of that's got a really long runtime that's come out in the last couple of years, sort of thing. But I know there are others. So maybe they won't insist on cutting movies down to this archaic 2 hours maximum runtime, and they will let directors and writers make something that actually works, and then the timing of it is not even a concern. But what did you think of Zack Snyder's Justice League? Let me know in the comments down below, guys. I really want to see how other people thought and felt about this movie. In the meantime, I would like to thank you all very much for tuning in. My name is Doragon. This is my review of Zack Snyder's Justice League. And until next time, guys, have yourself a fantastic day and take care.